We're here to go over the second quarter budget report from the city manager's office, provided to us by Mr. Moses. If the clerk will call the roll.
Here.
Here. Here. Here. Thank you. In order to move this along, we're already starting just a little late. I'm going to suggest that we go through the report section by section so that if anyone has questions, we can kind of stay on roughly the same topic. At this point in the overall report, if the manager or Mr. Moses would like to state anything, we'll start there.
Okay. Well, I'll be very brief. I think that the report shows that we're right in line essentially with our budget. Obviously, when you put a budget together in March and April, you're not entirely sure what's going to happen. 10 months out, but we feel that the budget's in good shape for fiscal year 2012, and it's sort of carrying forward the progress and the financial stability that we've achieved. Certainly, that was evident in fiscal year 11, and as we look forward to fiscal year 13, we also are looking at, we believe, a good financial position for the city, given the actions that have been taken over the last several years. So I'll let Mr. Moses walk through each section with you and let him field most of the questions here.
Mr. Moses.
Okay, as the manager stated, we're pretty well on track. I think all funds are pretty well on track. I wouldn't say that we're doing terrific in any area, but I think we're pretty much ahead of where we should be slightly. First section that I have in the report is general fund revenues, and if you want me to hit that, I will. The charts that are later in the report are very helpful here. Tax revenue continues through the first part of the year to be above where we anticipate. I don't think we're collecting anything in addition to where we think we normally would, but this year we tried to raise under the statute that allows a city to raise its preliminary taxes a little higher to kind of even out the flow during the year. We did that for the first time, which the way we generate this budget numbers to take a look at history. We've never done that in the history, so that's why it looks above where we are. But there were several discussions about taxes, and in particular, tax titles and delinquent taxes. Recently, Councilor Kennedy had a motion. So I think I'd like to take this opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into tax revenues, just to show you what's happened over the past couple of years, to give this a little context.
One of each.
Just, yeah. The chart that's going around shows two items of tax collection. There's a yellow bar, and that yellow bar represents what we collected in each tax levy at the end of that fiscal year. So for the first bar, the yellow bar for 2007, that means that at June 30th, 2007, we had collected 96.33% of that levy at that point. 2008, it was 97.09 of that levy. So as you can see, in general, as we've progressed over the last couple of years, our collection rate during the year of the tax levy has increased to somewhere between 97.5% and 98%. That's pretty darn good as a community. Now the blue line, that depicts collections since that levy up to June 30th, 2011. So that means taking 2007, for example. At June 30th, 2007, we collected 96%, but by June 30th, 2011, our collections have gone up to over 97%. Some of those collections, the majority of that comes at the very immediately after the close of the levy year. So you can see over time that has also increased, and we now collect ultimately somewhere between 98 and 99% of a tax levy before it goes into tax title. The reason the blue bar drops down in 2011 is we don't show the subsequent year. That will come up again to about between 98 and 99, probably at the close of 1 year. So that just gives you a little more depth. Okay?
Can I-
Question?
If there are any questions on revenues,
Yeah,
we'll begin with Counselor Elliott.
Just before you get too far, I just had one question. So that blue bar, that includes collections, say there was a lien back in '07. Are you saying it's collected?
It doesn't include any liens,
It doesn't?
No.
Okay, that's just strictly.
just strictly taxes before they become liens.
Before they become liens. So does that include penalties or interest or?
No,
No, okay, good.
Well, there is interest if it's late.
not in this chart.
Okay. Right.
Not in this chart.
We do
Okay.
collect it. if
Right.
it's-
Oh, I'm sure you do.
Right.
I just want to know if that was
Right.
included in here. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep, that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else on revenues? I
Okay,
guess
well, there's a couple more components to general fund revenue.
Okay. Counselor Martin?
Is there a state average or city, comparable city average for this? Are we better or worse than our peers? Do we know that?
I would say that we're probably better than many of our peer communities and probably more typical of a little wealthier community. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Moses, if you'll continue.
Okay, our state aid numbers also appear to be ahead of schedule, but that's really a timing issue. The state made a judgment call to distribute the roughly $10 million of school building assistance aid that we get each year completely by December 30th this year. Usually that is doled out quarterly throughout the year. So that really accounts for appearing to be ahead of schedule. The biggest category of revenues, of course, and the one with the most variability is local revenues. That's all our fees. And excise tax is the biggest part of that. That's about $7 million of roughly $20 million. We're in pretty good shape there. We're about $500,000 ahead of schedule. Part of that is temporary. We see there's some timing issues, but projections look like we'll finish the year $500,000, maybe to $1 million surplus, which is where you want to be because that is what's generating your free cash. If you get too aggressive there, we're never going to have any free cash. So that's good news.
And I think, if I may, I think that's an area that we've talked about in the past that's been problematic for many communities, including the city of Lowell some 20 years ago, where you can be so aggressive in that area that if there's any stumbling in the economy at all, that's where it falls off immediately, and that's where you run yourself into a deficit position.
Okay. Very good. I guess we can move on to general fund expenditures.
Okay. In general, once again, that looks pretty good. Halfway through the year, both the payroll expense and the non-payroll expense are both under 50%. So, we're within our budget. Again, there are a few items that vary considerably. Debt service is not even throughout the year, and we pay quite a bit of our principal pay down occurs in September when we typically issue bonds, which is why it looks like debt service is running hot, but it's not. In fact, we'll probably have a little bit of surplus there. There aren't very many categories that require a lot of attention, but one I'd like to point out is the manager's sick time buyback, because at the time that I wrote this, the spending was very low, 27%. It's, there was a verbal request by Councilor Kennedy to report on that usage, and
It was Counselor Elliott.
was it Councilor Elliott?
Somebody.
Okay, my mistake, sorry.
All right.
I have a report coming next week. It's not in this packet here, but I do have that analysis by department. But there is an update. We're now about 63% through the year, and we've actually spent 53% of that account. That's very good news because, oh, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong number. We've actually spent 76% of that account. At the same time, last year, we spent 86%. Part of the reason is the incentive is paid out in January and February. The part of that where an employee, if they meet certain eligibility requirements, can buy back up to a week's worth of vacation. So that, or excuse me, sick time. So that's all behind us. That's very good news because it's unlikely that we'll spend 24% throughout the rest of the year.
On the downside, though, of that, it means that there was more use of sick time in the last year than.
Well, that is one component of it. The other component may be that there's also a retirement buyback, and we may have had fewer retirements this year.
Okay.
But you'll get that in the report. I don't want to leak all the news so that you'll have nothing to talk about next week.
No, and I understand it's contractual, and those are
Right.
the things that have to be negotiated out, because we can sit here, we look at the numbers, and one way or the other, people either using, well, maybe in this case there was retirement, but it's not something that you have any control over. It's something we need to work on. It's clearly a cost in the budget that was used as an incentive, or it can be used as an incentive, but if people are entitled to it, they're entitled to it. It's just one of those benefits, again, one of these budget busters. It's a cost that we need to get a handle on. The only way to do that is through the collective bargaining process. So while point well taken, I mean, some could be the retirements, and the money has been expended up to this point, but it's a liability that, we're responsible for. It's a cost that we have to absorb, and we need to take some steps to try to address it. Was it 650, Mr. Moses?
I think so.
And I know I get as a
Yeah.
guess, it's around that. And
Yeah.
Is there any projection? Can that get greater or lesser? I mean, I guess it depends upon the employees and who
It largely
accumulates.
As Mr. Moses pointed out, there's actually two components to that budget item. One is the amount that's paid out to retirees that contractually they're eligible to get a payback of a certain amount when they leave, which was put in place many years ago as an incentive for people not to use sick time. There are flaws with that, though, that once you reach a certain point, then that incentive disappears because you've accumulated enough time that you can cash that out. And now
Could you give us an example, just for the people at home? How does, I assume you reach a carryover, or you reach a limit, and then is it annual that you can get it paid back, or is it a?
Well, there's two components.
Oh, right,
One on the
retire-
retiree,
right,
you
right.
get cash out of $20,000.
Right.
City
X
side
number
is,
of-
And
city
it's
side
not
is
dollar
20.
for dollar. It's I think depending on contract, 30 or 40%,
Right.
up to a limit.
Up to that limit of, right. How
Right.
many days you have in the book, you get a certain percent up to $20,000.
City, is school side, different, right?
That's different. That's right. That's, I believe, unlimited.
It's unlimited, okay.
but-
There wasn't, I thought there was
There was a-
yeah.
1/3,
Yeah, a
but
third.
unlimited.
But then it's right.
There's no cap.
But then there's no cap, right.
Right.
That's what I meant, unlimited. The other part of this, though, because that incentive is only an incentive up to a certain point, there was contractual language put in years ago that said, well, if you don't use any sick time, then you can get a week of your sick time back in cash. And that benefits because then you're not paying people out in overtime. And both make sense. Communities usually do one or the other, but we have both. So but they are contractual. They've been put in there, and it's going to require us to look and see what the best way is to figure out our way out of that. And it is something, obviously, that we always talk about in our collective bargaining sessions.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. So did the retirement, both pools of money, both
In that
come out of that pool? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Counselor Broderick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I was going to actually ask the same question, if you could give us an example of how this works, but you've done that, thank you. Mr. Moses, in your report, because I was also going to ask the question of, okay, if we're paying out more, potentially, or paying out less, does that mean, people are taking more sick time or less sick time? Is there a direct correlation? I assume that it kind of sort of means there's people taking more sick time, but I understand there's different contract, or there's different ways it's done, so that it might not necessarily, but if we could get some of that information in your report, I don't know if it already has it, or...
Actually, you're right, there is a correlation, and it's best described when talking about that week buyback, because in order to be eligible to sell that week buyback, you have to have accumulated 75 days, which is for most people about 5 years worth of sick time. So that means that somebody who hasn't built a track record of not taking time is not going to get any benefit. Then beyond that, I think you can only take up to 1 or 2 days per year to be eligible to, in the past 12 months, to be eligible to take that. So if you've taken a week's sick time during the course of a year, you're not going to be able to sell any back. So you're right, you either use it or some people sell it back. Other people try and bank it toward retirement, and if they do that, they're not selling it back either. So it goes to one of those three pots. It either goes to using it, to the annual buyback, or banking it toward retirement.
Okay, quick question. Do we also give personal days? We get sick days, personal days? Like, in other words...
We do give sick, personal days, but we don't, there's no provision to sell them back.
No, so obviously then I would use a personal day.
Use it or lose
Or
it.
a sick day if I wanted to try and get my week's pay, right?
Right, right.
And financially, it makes more sense to pay someone a week's pay rather than pay someone else overtime to cover them?
It varies by job classification.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Counselor Mercer?
In that related matter, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Tom, do you have a sick bank opportunity in this city, sick bank?
There is, we have a couple of union contracts, or at least one union contract that does have that. I think we run an informal sick bank for non-union employees, but I don't recall, I can't recall the last time that's been used.
DPW have a sick bank?
It depends on the union.
Right, that would be, there's, in DPW, there's different unions, there's 1705, there's MVEA units, and there is a specific DPW, there's 1705. Oftentimes what happens is we've been trying to, there's a number of different ways we can do this. We can look at a citywide sick bank, and we've talked a little bit about that. There's also the possibility of doing something with some type of disability program, disability insurance program that we would purchase in lieu of sick time. There's a number of different ways to skin this cat, but we've been limited somewhat with the collective bargaining because of the economic conditions.
Thank you.
Counselor Elliott?
All right. Mr. Moses, while that's still a work in progress, the buyback sick, is there any way for you to segregate the retiree cost versus the annualized cost?
Yes, it'll be.
that what you're planning to
It'll
do?
be
Okay.
separated. Actually, if you can imagine, there'll be a grid.
Right,
Down one end is each department, and then a column for each
okay.
of those two
That-
programs.
I think that'll help, I'm sure it'll help you, it'll also help us. And I was just gonna suggest, on these sick banks, isn't it the case where you can donate only annual leave and not sick leave? I mean, I know that's where it is, that's how it is where I'm at, that you can't donate sick for sick, you have to donate annual for sick.
That's just fire.
Ah.
Right.
Okay,
I think I mentioned this at the last meeting. Councilor Elliott raised this issue. This may be, this in particular may, but a number of other issues too, but maybe a good opportunity to have a meeting, an executive session with the council to discuss some of these issues as it relates to trying to move forward with the bargaining position of the city.
Okay. I have a few questions under expenses. I don't know if you're already going to comment on them. But one of the areas you brought up as an area of concern was the telephone project.
Right.
And that we're spending a little more on it because it's taking longer to transition.
Right.
If you could speak to that,
That,
or give us an update.
really, nothing has changed. We're pretty much scheduled to cut all the Verizon lines that are going to be cut over in March. The project, from a user standpoint, will probably be done before the end of this month. By user standpoint, I mean that most everyone will have new numbers. They're not going to change. The public is going to be able to now have a phone list and call, and they'll be talking on the new phone system. It's just some of the work that goes on below the surface that actually saves us the money. That's what's left over that'll be wrapped up sometime in March.
You also highlighted the police department, I think mostly fuels. How are we doing there?
We continue to run a little strong on fuel usage. Their budget is $20 million. It's usually enough to move some money around at the end of the year if they have some problems like that. And I know the chief and his staff look at that pretty closely, so I'm not so worried about that.
So you still feel that between now and the end of the year, we'll be within that window? That they can stay
I think
within
so. We'll overspend that line item. He'll probably cover it. That remains a concern going forward into 2013 because automobile fuel, both gasoline and diesel fuel, continue to rise. And it's not as simple to hedge those costs like we do with electricity and gas, heating gas.
And the last one that I have was at about 68% spend at half-year point was the library. But you had highlighted that, but you didn't say why.
Yeah, that's not too much of a concern. The library obtains a pretty significant grant from the state, runs, I think, about $130,000 a year. They tend to use the general fund budget for a while, and then when they're sure they get notification that they have that grant, which they did receive recently, they begin charging a lot of their expenses to the grant. And when it's exhausted during the year, then they move back to the general fund budget. So that's why it doesn't worry me too much.
Okay. That's all the questions I had on the general fund expenses. Councilor Broderick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I just had a couple of questions. One in here, you mentioned in the report about street lighting.
Right.
And what, a good news one, I suppose, is the snow and ice.
Sure.
Where are we at
Sure.
with that? And, I mean, it hasn't really snowed, but I know there's been some rainfall, and I know the sanders have been out and all that, so I think we're all in the anticipation that there's been no snow and ice money spent because it hasn't really snowed, but that's not the case. So
Right.
could you give us maybe an update on that?
Sure. Okay, snow and ice, well, I'm glad you asked that because the report was really written before a lot of the expenses occurred. This year, we took our snow and ice budget from 700 or 800,000 up to $1.2 million. So we added significantly. We've already spent about, I think, 670,000. A lot of that is sand and salt preparing for the winter. And when it does freeze, and if there's water on the road, they're sending crews out to sand as a precautionary measure, and sometimes pre-treating the road. We've had a few false alarms here where there's been some forecast of snow, and it didn't occur, fortunately. That doesn't mean there's no expense. Usually there's a watchman on. He's calling in icy spots, calling in trucks for spot sanding or spot salting. But also he's there in case the snow really falls to be able to get the first our guys in and then the contractors. So, but we, here we are, we're more than halfway through February, and from whatever happens from now on, we could get a foot of snow next week, but chances are it'll melt fairly quickly too. So I hate to use the S word, but we may actually have a surplus there.
And by way of comparison, it is, I know it's difficult for people to see this. They look around, they say there's no snow, but we as Mr. Moses said, we do have to buy the salt and sand and the other, materials for the equipment, and we have been out salting and sanding at various times. But by way of comparison, we're pretty much in line with what other communities, as a percentage, have spent of their budget. Although that's not a good number necessarily, because some budget much higher than we do, and so they come down lower. We traditionally have spent somewhere in the vicinity of, I think, about $3 million, $2.5 to $3 million. So
For the season,
for
of
the
year?
season, right? So we're well below what we've spent in the past.
And one other item, you probably noticed that the potholes are not quite as bad as they were last year. That may be due to the weather, may also be due to the fact that these guys are not plowing snow and are not sanding, so they can tend to some of these potholes faster before they get to be real problems. And so there's some of that going on. That does add to the expense, because they're buying hot mix that they're pouring in there and charging that to snow and ice, because it is the weather that creates those potholes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Council Martin.
On the supplies, the sand and the salt, is that stock that if it's not used, obviously that's available?
Right, it's carried over to the next year.
Someone in the audience raised their hand. Did you want to speak? If you could state your name and your address, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andres Rivera, and I'm glad that we're talking about the snow. Just, that's what I come to talk about. I've been in Lowell for 41 years, and I never see something happen like this year, no snow at all. And it happens that I live on Market Street, and I live in a housing. Right now, I got issues with the housing because I asked them for a ticket for parking on the parking lot, and they refuse it. My car is registered to be parked on the street, and I do accept the gas restriction for the snow time, not to park on certain areas on Market Street. But it happens, I heard there was, back in 80-something, they come out with this rule, even if we don't have no snow, we can go out there and ticket the citizens. I got 2 tickets in a week and a half in the same place in 12 years that I've been parking in there. And before, we got snow in there, we park in there, and we don't get tickets. And I think this is a shame for the city to be ticketing people late at night at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning when there's no snow. I understand the rules are in there. They don't have the sign up there say restriction is snow removal, don't park here. They have them in some places. Luckily, in the building that I live, it doesn't have that. And I'm the only one. I'm speaking for the citizens, and I've been asking questions about this to a lot of citizens, different races, and the same answer that I got all the time, that this is not right. We are paying for something that we shouldn't be paying.
Yeah, that's the snow emergency route. Actually, Council Laurie brought that up last week, and the administration's looking into that, see if we can do it differently. But like you said, those laws have been in place for a long time, that on major arteries, the signs are up, no parking during the season.
The sign right, but, that's something that I do believe they can vote on it, but that can be changed every year, because this year, unfortunately, all these years, I never seen something like this. So why chicken people will have no snow? I think if the rule is there, but it's something the city council worker can change for that year. I say, we don't have no snow, we don't gonna get ticket people because it doesn't occur. We are waiting for the snow, and it haven't happened yet. Unfortunate, but we are getting tickets.
Okay.
And I think it's unfair, And I'm a citizen that I work for the city, I work in the elections days, and I love this city. Because, I'm proud of the city of Lowell. I came to Lowell back in 1971. I see Lowell grow. I love it because a beautiful city became a beautiful city compared back 30 years, 40 years ago. But when I see something wrong, I'm a citizen that I call the Department of Work, since something's wrong in here, it got to be fixed. It needs to be done. And I keep pushing until I get it done. Like you can call, you see my name, Andres Rivera, call here and report this and that. But if they're going to attack citizens like me, ticket me late at night, the housing refused to give me a ticket, what we're going to do? I feel like a ham and a sandwich between, what am I going to do?
All right.
Now I got threat, they're going to take my car if I parking on the housing parking. I would like you guys to,
I
make
said
some
the administration is going to look into it. I'll give them a chance to comment. But thank you for your comments. This subcommittee is not directly related to that. But I'm sure it'll be noted. And the city manager, I know, is working on possibly changing that policy.
I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Mr. Manager, is there anything you'd like to add?
We had a meeting just last week on it, and the issue is really one of, Mr. Chairman, as you pointed out, it's a snow emergency route that's been in place now for 20, 30 years now in the city, and it's, the intent is to allow for, making sure that those major arteries, if people park on a side street when we have a snow ban, it's problematic, but it doesn't cripple the entire city. And these are major streets that were identified several years ago, 30 years ago, and it's still the case to a large extent, that if those were to be blocked off in any way, we wouldn't be able to plow the whole city. So, but we are looking at it and looking at some other options as well.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the enterprise funds. All right. Beginning with, I believe the first one is wastewater.
Sure. Wastewater, I wish there was something exciting to report, but revenues are about 3% above where they ought to be. It's not a great cushion, but it's fairly comfortable, and they'll probably extend it throughout the year. No great surprises. The towns continue to get billed, and we're at least sustaining, if not growing, the hauled waste component, where we're actually, we expect to take in close to $2 million this year in the hauled waste. That's that additional capability that Mark Young had presented to you, where the plant is now not only taking septage from the septic haulers, but also from other institutional wastewater facilities.
And we are looking, through some readjustment of some of the capital spending, we'll be getting a report to the council on this. We're looking at some modifications to the plans out there at the plant that will allow us to more efficiently process that hauled waste, so that we'll cut down on those costs and be able to take in an additional amount.
There is one item that really doesn't go into the revenues and expenditures, but moving forward, as I update the 5-year forecast for wastewater, that's going to change the year 2013 quite positively, and that relates to the state's water pollution abatement trust. That's where we get the low interest revolving loans. They restructured their borrowing to actually push payments out into 2014 instead of 2013. So we may very well get one more year of reprieve there. That is not likely to repeat in the future because those loans are now committed and borrowed.
Councilor Broderick?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. There's a note in here about the only expense item that's of concern is electricity. We all know it's going up. We had something come in a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, regarding the city being able to go out and purchase this, whatever we want to call it, purchase our own electricity. Is that something that would be, I assume that would be helpful here, but also, no?
No, this issue really has to do with some of the construction that has happened on the site, and in particular, how the meters were installed during that construction. It appears that there's been some double billing going on, and we've brought in some people from the utilities as well as some outside people to correct that. And it's in the process of being corrected now.
So once that's corrected, it shouldn't be a concern, is that? That's correct. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, I've certainly been waving the flag on wastewater for some time, and I'll continue to. I realize expenses are expenses. The revenues we have in the stream are what we have, but I hope we can do something to narrow the gap between them so that going forward, there'll be a much smaller rate increase needed. One thing I'd like to see is maybe a projection of what rate increase we'll need 2014, 2015 in order to bring this into balance. I do have a question about an item of revenue that begins in FY 2013. You have it labeled at IMA modifications. If you could let us know what that is. At least others may know, I don't.
IMA stands for Intermunicipal Agreement, and those are the agreements that we have with surrounding towns. Those are very old agreements and don't necessarily capture all of the costs that we feel that they should capture. And as those agreements expire and we negotiate new agreements, we believe that we'll be able to capture more of the cost that we spend on behalf of the communities that are delivering wastewater to us.
Does that mean that once you negotiate new agreements, you expect that $1 million to be distributed amongst what you have line items for each town, community? Correct.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's $1 million, and we really have to get it. Otherwise, our budget gap is even higher than it is right now.
Correct.
The other item is I noticed the debt service goes up by about 1.2 million between FY12 and FY13. Is there a new bond coming in?
Well, that's quite a bit of borrowing, and that is actually what I was referring to just prior. That may actually be pushed out to 14, or at least a portion of that will be put out to 14. But really, what that is the $35 million bond issue that was authorized back in 2009, I believe. That spending is now winding up, and as that becomes permanent borrowing, we're going to have to start paying principal back, and that is exactly the bump that you're seeing.
Okay, so again, I'm waving a flag so that with the FY13 budget, I hope some of this will get addressed somehow to narrow the gap. Manager?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you, and it's something we've been working hard to do over the last number of years in terms of, and I believe I'd be quoting back to you your own comments on this, that the enterprises have to be more enterprising. And I think what we've seen in all of the enterprise funds, but I would say particularly wastewater and public parking, is that they've taken steps to become more enterprising, taking in the hauled waste, looking for ways to cut down on energy costs, looking for other efficiencies that can be realized that bring revenue or cut costs. And a great deal has been done along those lines, and perhaps some type of analysis that shows all of that would be helpful to the public and certainly for the administration and for the council. At the same time, I think in wastewater in particular, what we've seen is the need for capital spending that's been either deferred or mandated upon us. Deferred in terms of the plant that hasn't received the investment until now that it should have been receiving, which is commonplace in municipalities. And then the other issue we have, of course, is the CSO work that is all coming. You know, it started in 2004, but it's really come to hit the last couple of years in particular. And so we're trying to handle all of those pressures. You know, we still have a very competitive rate. We don't want to see the spikes, but we still have a very, very competitive rate compared to other communities. But I agree that we need to continue to work at that issue.
Thank you. Council Broderick?
Thank you. We do see there's going to be a deficit on the horizon, and regardless of whether or not we get a reprieve from FY13, I would prefer, and I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but I'd prefer to see us come in with a plan for moderate increases rather than waiting till all the money's gone and come in with a 23 or 27 or 18% increase. I think as bad as things are, I think people would rather know what the schedule is. I know I would be more comfortable understanding and then hoping that we can also close the gap in the meantime, whether renegotiating or buying our own electricity, whatever we do, solar panels, whatever may come up in the next few years. But I'd prefer to see a 3% increase that's going to stretch this out rather than waiting and letting someone else pay for it down the road.
We agree completely.
I would also agree with Council Broderick's suggestion, and that's one of the reasons I asked for a projection of what the rate increase is that we would need. I mean, I'd rather have a small increase that pushes it much further out, and maybe later have another smaller increase to get us balanced. I guess unless there's more on wastewater, we'll move on to, let's see. Next would be parking, which seems to be in good shape.
Parking is a great success story. Revenues on a whole continue to rise, and they continue to rise in the way that's preferential. We're seeing more meter revenue, more garage revenue, and fewer fines. And that's exactly the way you want to see it. But on net, the revenue continues to go up every single year.
And if I may, on that enterprise as well, again, being enterprising, we have some ideas of how to improve things even more, because at some point down the road, we will likely need another parking garage in the city. We'd like to set ourselves up for that in the right way rather than putting it off. But we have some ideas that Mr. Carney and Tom and I are working on to try to build in additional revenue, but it may require some investment of funding up front, but we can do that in a way that maintains rates.
Okay. And since that appears to be in order, if we can move on to the water enterprise, I think that's the last one.
And water is one where, if you'll remember, there was a fairly large water increase about a year ago now, and that's running a big surplus at this point. The revenues are about 10% above normal. We anticipated that because this is the first year that the rate increase is in effect for the year. But better yet, we had a loan order for $10.45 million, and we selected that level of investment to be able to avoid rate increases, and it appears that that's working just the way it ought to. The meter program is increasing. As you know, that's winding down. They were replacing large industrial meters, which as meters age, they tend to slow up. And by replacing those industrial meters for the biggest customers that we have, it's actually generating more revenue, also adding to the revenue and allowing us to push out any rate increases beyond the visible horizon.
And again, I think this is an area that we again see some further revenue enhancements by, in cost reductions by changing over more and more meters of the city to the automatic read meters. But again, that requires an outlay of capital but if we can do that in a planned fashion, it can be done within the existing rate structure and still save us money in the long run.
Council Bardock?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask about that. The debt service here goes up about 400,000 into FY13. Is that including the 10.45?
No, the debt service on the 10.45 is in a separate line on there, so it sticks out.
Oh, no, okay.
Yep.
All right. So these meters here, is there a way to come in with are you gonna come in with a proposal for a plan as to how to stagger these in terms of adding without increasing the rates?
We're working at that now, and we hope to have something on that within the 6 months or so.
Because our debt service goes up, and then it starts to drop back off again.
Right, so if we could layer that, look at some way to layer that in, but that's just more in the parking one is more immediate that we're looking at, the ideas we have there. In the meters, that needs quite a bit more work from staff.
And that peak is really the culmination of the $19 million capital plan that they had. We're finishing up a water tower and those items, and so when we start paying on those, that's the jump.
The other point on that, and I know that I saw Councilor Kennedy and I have discussed this, that because of the lack of snow, there may be a greater demand for water from the other communities around us. So there may be some opportunities there for us for additional revenue in the upcoming year.
Okay. Council Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we had that plan that called for, I think, $5 million capital expenditure for new meters, and I think that was part of what was delayed. And part of the reason I objected to that, it didn't look like the payout was it would be over a period of 50 years. Now, we were dealing with, I think, estimates of the increased revenue as opposed to some actual numbers. So if that is going to come back at some point, maybe with this work we've done, we'll have a better track record of what the increased revenue is. I don't know if the water department is tracking that, but at least to my way of thinking, that was one of the deficiencies in their program, was it didn't show enough savings over time in increased revenue to justify the capital expense. So that's something I think that needs to be monitored if we're going to get there in the future.
Actually, two things. The part of the revenue increase that you see is because of those meters, but also I want to point out that the water department, as well as the other enterprises, have also been enterprising, and they discovered over the last 12 months that plant actually can be somewhat divided, and half the plant in low demand times can be brought offline, and they can switch it back and forth. That has reduced electricity usage as fewer pumps are going. And they're actually saving money. So really everybody is coming to the table with their own innovative ideas to make these enterprises work.
Okay, at this point, we're running up against city council time. Are there any last-minute questions, comments? No. Move to adjourn by Council Martin, second by Council Broderick. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.